Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to speak to you about Jesus the Good Shepherd, and this is the fourth in the series of talks I'm doing on the I Ams of John. In John chapter 10, verses 1 to 21, Jesus says that he is the Good Shepherd. And I was thinking about what makes a good shepherd. How does this explain what Jesus is like to us today? I drew the picture on the right there, the big picture, some years ago when I was thinking about the Lord is my shepherd and Jehovah Rohi. And there's four elements to that picture. There's a sort of pink blob in the middle, and the red drop of blood, the brown crook, and the green sort of stuff behind. And in preparing for this talk, I drew another picture that's kind of like four separate little pictures, and I want to talk about each one of those. So first of all, the pink bit in the middle, the pink centre. In John chapter 10 and verses 3 and 4, Jesus says, the good shepherd calls his own sheep by name, and later on he says his sheep follow him because they know his voice. Now, most mammals and birds care for their young because there's a deep emotional and psychological bond that forms between a newborn and its parent. We call this attachment. Exactly how the attachment figure is recognised varies according to species. The most famous example of this is the one shown in this picture. Basically, ground nesting birds like ducks and geese and swans have an innate ability to form an attachment with the first thing that they see moving across their field of vision when they hatch out the egg. And the bloke in the picture is Conrad Lorenz. He was a famous psychologist who investigated this. And the birds in the picture are grey-lag geese. And they're not following him, actually. They're following his Wellingtons. Because in his investigation, the geese hatched out in an incubator with a record turntable, an old-fashioned record turntable. And on this turntable, there was a Wellington kind of like going round. And so wherever the little geese were in the incubator when they hatched out, the thing that kind of moved across their field of vision was a Wellington. And so they imprinted, as they say, on this Wellington, and they're following the Wellingtons because they recognise the Wellingtons. Now, exactly how an animal recognises its attachment figure varies from species to species. What's less well known than the geese one is that baby lambs recognise their attachment figure by what they sound like. If you've ever walked through a field with ewes in it, female sheep and baby lambs, you will hear an awful lot of ba, ba, ba. Now to you, it's just a lot of baaing, but what those sheep are doing is that as they're kind of like calling for their specific parent or child. You know, the mummy sheep looks up, can't see the baby. She's worried he's gone off and wandered into danger, and so she goes bah, to call the baby back to her. Well, baby sheep eating a nice bit of grass looks up, can't see mum, feels really lost, and so it goes bah. And basically they can locate each other in that field full of lots of sheep just by the sound. They recognise the sound of each other's voices. Back in Jesus' day, they didn't know about Conrad Lorenz and comparative psychology, but sheep were the same. Sheep still recognised their attachment figure by what they sounded like. And shepherds in Jesus' day utilised this in their work with sheep. I told you last time about the sheepfold where the sheep sleep at night, and these sheepfold could be quite big. You could have 3 or 4 flocks of sheep sleeping in one of those overnight, and in the morning all the shepherds of the sheep would gather outside the sheepfold, and they would take it in turns to call their sheep out. They didn't go in and get them. They actually stood outside and called the sheep by name. So they might call, Black Nose, Crumpled Horn, and the sheep would come out and they would come to their shepherd, the one whose voice they recognised, and they would follow the one whose voice they recognised. I don't think they recognise their names. I think they recognise the sound of the voice. So what does all this tell us about Jesus and his relationship with us? I think it's telling us that we should have an intimate relationship with Jesus, that it should be as intimate as the attachment between a newborn baby and its mother. He wants to be close to us. He wants to know us individually. He cares about you as an individual. And Jesus, when he's acting as our shepherd, he cares for us. In Ezekiel chapter 34 and verse 4, God criticized Israel's shepherds at the time. But by shepherds, he didn't mean the people who looked after the sheep. He actually meant the religious leaders of Israel. And he said he says of them in criticism, you have not strengthened the weak, you have not healed the sick, you have not bound up the injured. And then later on in chapter 34 of Ezekiel, God promises to send a shepherd who will do these things. So when Jesus declared, I am the good shepherd, he's saying that his aim is to strengthen the spiritually weak, to heal those who are sick, to bind up those who are injured. He's not the God who cares for the spiritually robust, those who are going on with their faith and they've seen 6 miracles before breakfast. No, he's very much interested in the timid evangelist, the person who prays against hope or certainty for a healing, the doubter, the downright broken in their faith. Those are the sheep that Jesus cares for. Right, second element in the picture I drew is the drop of blood. In John 10 and verse 11, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. In fact, in John chapter 10, Jesus says 5 times about the good shepherd laying down his life for his sheep. So we have to conclude that this is a very important bit in the shepherd's role. Sheep are grazing animals and they're prey for many predators. In Jesus's day, in the land of Israel, there were lions, bears, and wolves. Those animals are extinct from Israel now, but they were a very present threat to sheep back in his day. And the shepherd would carry with him a wooden club, a bit like a baseball bat, shorter than a baseball bat and much thicker. And he would use this hefty wooden club to kind of beat off the lions and the wolves and the bears. And if you think about it, these are big animals. They have sharp teeth. They have really sharp claws. To get close enough to them, to beat them off with a club, you're putting yourself at risk. You know, you could have an eye scratched out. You could have a finger bitten off. You might be clawed so badly that you're maimed for life. You lose the use of an arm or a leg. Maybe you die from loss of blood. So you really had to put your life at risk as a shepherd to protect your sheep. If you were a hired shepherd, if you were being paid to look after somebody else's sheep, you might well think, stuff that for a game of soldiers. You know, it's just not worth the risk. I don't care what he's paying me. I'm out of here. But if you were a shepherd who ran your own business, you know, you've got your own sheep there, and your business stands or falls on those sheep surviving. Well, in that case, you're going to take the risk. If that's your job, the thing that you're there to do is to look after those sheep, and you have no other role in life. That is what you do. It's like you stand or fall on it. You're going to take the risk. And Jesus is that kind of shepherd. What does this tell us about Jesus? I drew another picture. In fact, I drew a series of pictures when I was doing some Bible studies on what's the role of the cross. And this picture tells a different story. It's a bit like the kind of third-rate detective drama that's repeated on Freeview TV. And I have to say, the kind of thing I like to watch to relax. It's about a kidnapping. The pink figure tied to the chair, that's us with a kidnapped victim. And we're in the clutches, the black clawed hands there of the devil. And he's kind of got us. And the one that the ransom demand is sent to is God. And God has to pay an awful lot to get us, the victims, back. At the top of the picture, there's a blue bag, a kind of sports holder that you might take your PE kit to school in. And out of it is poking a little golden cross. Because in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, it says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." What does this say about us? If you want to know what something is worth, you need to find out what people are prepared to pay for it. And God paid Jesus for you. God's not a fool. That was a huge price. He wasn't conned. He wasn't conned into paying over the odds. That is what you're worth. Right, the third bit of my first picture is the shepherd's crook. In John chapter 10 and verse 4, Jesus said, when he has brought out his own, he goes on ahead of them. A good shepherd led the sheep, went out in front. So what's this all about? In both Matthew and Mark's gospel, Jesus is referred to as having compassion on the crowds that were following him. He looked at them and he saw that they were like sheep without a shepherd. So this suggests that they were people needing guidance. They didn't need guidance to a bit of juicy grass. They needed moral, ethical, religious guidance. They needed to be taught how to live so that they were living God's way. And Jesus' response to this need was to teach them. The teachings that he gave to those people, they are recorded in the Gospels. So we can read them today. And if we're going to be sheep who listen to his voice, then we need to read them and we need to strive to understand them. Another bit about this is that when a shepherd was leading the sheep, he carried a special bit of equipment, not the club. Well, he did carry the club as well, but he also carried a thing called a crook. And it's a bit like a kind of walking stick, and it's a bit longer, and it's got a sort of curly bit at the end of it, of the handle thing there. And the crook isn't for hitting the sheep when they're bad. It's actually for rescuing them. If they go off the path and they fall in a ditch, the crook is there to pull them back, to get them back on the right line. And in Ezekiel 34, God also criticized Israel's religious leaders, saying, you have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. Don't misunderstand the role of the shepherd with a crook. Jesus is not carrying a crook because he wants to beat bad sheep with it. Basically, Jesus' mission is to rescue us. God's plan in sending Jesus was to redeem us. He wasn't sent to judge us. If you've strayed or sinned or done wrong before God, don't fear his punishment in this life. What he wants is for you to come back to him, to confess your sin and to have your relationship with him restored. In Matthew, Mark and Luke, in all three of the so-called synoptic gospels, there is a story told by Jesus called the parable of the lost sheep. And in this story, a shepherd leaves 99 sheep that are happily grazing, and he goes off, leaves them to the wolves and lions and whatever, in order to rescue just one sheep. I mean, in Jesus' day, this was a crazy story. You know, if you run a business and you've got 99 things that are doing well, you don't risk those 99 to go and get one thing set up and running well again. You know, you stay with the 99, you play the percentage. But in his story, the shepherd goes off after the one. And when he finds this sheep, it's presumably not a very fit and well sheep because he can't walk back. He actually has to put it on his shoulders and carry it back. But he is overjoyed because he has found this lost sheep. I mean, what this tells us is that Jesus really, really, really wants to rescue us. He's gone out of his way to rescue us and to save us. I do think when time is finally rolled up, that Jesus will stand in judgment upon those who've sinned. And actually, that's all of us. We've all sinned. And if you haven't accepted Jesus' ransom buying you back, you will be judged. But that's not in this life. In this life, there's a way back. Jesus is looking for you, and he wants you in relationship with him. The last bit of my picture is a sort of green bits all around the edge, and that's supposed to represent green pasture and abundant life. When Jesus started his teaching ministry, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he was handed the scroll of Isaiah, and he chose which bit to read. And the bit he read was Isaiah 61 verses 1 to 3. It's on the screen here. I would say that sounds like pretty good news if you're a sheep of Jesus. That following Jesus should be about joy. So, what sort of shepherd is Jesus? To answer that question, you need to think about Jill being a COVID vaccinator. That's the pink blob in the middle there. Because Jesus is someone who cares for us individually. Think about the drop of red blood. That's Mike being a firefighter. He might have to go in and rescue somebody from a burning building. And Jesus died on the cross to rescue us. Think about the brown wooden crook. That's Linda being a driving instructor. Jesus has given us teaching for how to live a good life. And finally, think about me being a florist and doing some flower arranging. Cut flowers are not terribly useful. You can't eat them, but they do bring joy. And Jesus's life, the life with Jesus, is about having joy. Thank you for listening.